Since Britain started immigrating workers in from its former colonies in the middle of the last century, people have debated what it means to be British. Is it about race and long historical connections with the country, or is it just a matter of signing some forms and getting citizenship? So if you ask the average multiculturalist this question, they tell you quite confidently that once you have citizenship, you're as British as the next person. So by this philosophy, a recent immigrant from, say, Botswana can be just as British as someone whose family line goes back hundreds of years or more. The racial characteristics of each is irrelevant, so we can't say that one of them looks typically British. And to use such language would be unacceptable to many people, and a few would describe it as racist. Well, there's some plausibility in this view. After all, if someone is living here with their family, working hard and contributing to society, why shouldn't they be viewed equally in terms of their Britishness? Some right of centre groups would encourage a type of nationalism based on this idea whereby black and white Britons should unite in their loyalty to their nation. Another type is known as ethnic nationalism. This proposes that a nation should be considered as a grouping of people of very similar racial origins. And they would argue that a Nigerian may be allowed to go and live in, say, India, but they should not consider themselves or be considered by others as Indian in the most important sense. Ethnic nationalists would campaign for any immigration to be of people as close as possible to the perceived ethnicity of the indigenous population. They'd not necessarily be opposed to having people from ethnically alien countries live alongside them, but the numbers of those should be kept very low so that they won't change the culture dramatically. Now, the left would say that determining origins is so problematic as to become impossible. They emphasise how the UK, for example, has been invaded, occupied and colonised by so many nations that it is a mongrel nation. If they're right, there's no point in the UK ever thinking of itself in ethnic terms. The switched-on viewer will have noticed that the opposition from the left to any sense of ethnic identity appears to be targeted at white European people only, and this is a significant fact that must be exposed because the leftists hate white people even if most of them are white themselves. The point has been made a number of times lately by internet voices on the right, and it's good to see an awakening among white people, but I wanted to reiterate it, really. The left doesn't use the term mongrel for any other nation than Britain. It would be seen as utterly offensive, used about anyone else. That's just the way it is. It never complains about, say, lack of diversity in black countries, so you won't hear them complain about African football teams being 100% black. Do we hear howls of protest about Nigerian television having too few white faces? Of course not. It's laughable to even imagine it. So why the double standard? Well, incredibly, they have no objection to people being proud of their country, heritage or even race, and are sometimes here to support the rights of certain groups to preserve their racial heritage. But none of this applies to white Europeans. For them to preserve their ethnic identity is an extreme form of racism, and the notion must be met with hostility and even violence, and even the term white has been made toxic, so that black rights and black power are commendable causes, while mere utterance of the corresponding terms, such as white rights, is met with immediate and severe vilification. People have been smeared, banned from social media, lost their jobs, had their families ruined, all for daring to speak out against anti-white racism. Is there such a thing? Of course there is. We're bombarded daily with propaganda about how evil white people are and how great black people are. Do black people not feel patronised by this? By trashing whites and fawning over everything black, the left, the Guardian readers, the Hollywood set, the champagne socialists and the state media are implying that black people need to be wrapped in cotton wool, told at every opportunity how superior they are and how we will flagellate ourselves for all time because some black people we don't know were treated badly by some white people we don't know hundreds of years ago or decades ago? Do blacks not see the fear within the media of not offending them, while the same media speaks with contempt about white people? Are they not embarrassed that the media is desperately trying to exaggerate the accomplishments of blacks while belittling those of white people? It's a huge subject, but today I want to use just one example of how Western society has been conditioned to accept the validity of some distinct racial groups while dismissing others. The film The Impossible is based on real events of the 2004 tsunami that killed 250,000 people. And it's a story of one family's experience being caught up in the calamity. See if you can spot the problem.
You might like this better. Where do you come from?
Japan.
You don't look Japanese.
Oh, well, I work for a big company there, and...
So did you get that? The Thai hotel worker asked where they were from and laughed when they said Japan. Of course he laughed. They clearly don't look Japanese, and it was a valid observation. They look European, and everyone can see that, even if they're ashamed to voice it. The husband smiled and explained that his work took him to Japan. If you don't see the issue, let me give you a prompt. Imagine the guests were black people from London. Imagine them telling the waiter guy they were British. Imagine the waiter laughing and saying, "You don't look British." Simply, it would never be allowed. What, denying that he's properly British? What kind of savage are you? If you're cringing just picturing that second scenario, don't be too hard on yourself. You're a victim of the establishment's social engineering, and they've done a very good job. Just remind yourself that if you're a white Briton and you went over to China and got citizenship, that wouldn't make you a Chinaman. It's absurd to suggest otherwise, and only a true social justice warrior would. They're the type of people who insist that a man in a dress, calling himself Sheila, should be legally regarded as a woman if he or she wishes. Tell yourself that it's just as okay to recognise white North European as an ethnic group as it is black African. And always remember that our extremely vocal enemy is dripping in hypocrisy and double standards. They are driven by a real blind hatred of the white European. What we need to do, I suggest anyway, is find ways of exposing their anti-white bigotry and racial hatred, and put them in a corner and paint instead a picture of a truly diverse planet where every racial group is allowed to value its identity, and to do it mostly within the bounds of their own lands.